The werewolf I know and love. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My Dogman story starts as I was walking in the grove behind my house, looking for my cat Hubert, who did not seem to be anywhere inside. As I was strolling through the trees, I heard a loud meowing sound. To my surprise, I saw my cat stranded in a tall tree on a high branch in the distance, with no apparent way of coming down. My heart was racing as I realized he was way up too high for me to reach. But that was when my racing heart saw something that made it stop short. A hairy, tall, humanoid dogman standing near that tree. I mean a legitimate monster, not a furry in a suit or anything like that. As the creature approached the tree and my Hubert, I was terrified and didn't know what to expect. But then, with an effortless reach, the dogman pulled my cat gently out of the tree without any hassle, as I watched in amazement. I couldn't believe it. I had often heard rumors of dogmen, but never had I seen one before. He placed my cat on the ground with no fuss, and Hubert skedaddled back to me, crying and meowing about the big adventure he just had. That huge, upright canine creature looked at me for a moment, before slowly walking away into the forest. I was still in shock and couldn't move. I watched the dogman walk away, realizing that there was something different about it. It had the elegance of a wild animal, yet the motives of a kind-hearted human being. As I walked back home with my cat in my arms, my mind was filled with questions about the dogman. Did it have a family? Was it an outcast from a different world? What did it eat? I couldn't help but wonder if the dogman had saved my cat out of kindness, or if it had been some kind of pure instinct. From that day onward, I couldn't stop thinking about that dogman. Even though it had left a lasting impression on me, a part of me was still scared of the unknown, and the thought of such a creature roaming the earth. But one thing is for sure, I'll never forget the day when a tall, hairy humanoid dogman saved my cat from that tree and became my friend. I guess the next time the dogman returned into my life was after the car accident. I just weirdly drove off the road one evening, and it was the dogman who pulled me from my crashed car and got me medical attention. At least, that's the way I remember it happening. See, I remember driving and then feeling lightheaded and everything going black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the arms of a big, strong, furry man with a dog's head, carrying me to a hospital. I blinked my eyes repeatedly, trying to shake off the disorientation. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt a jolt of fear. However, something in those eyes reassured me that I was not in danger, at least not from him. And that was when I felt a different kind of a jolt. As he carried me, I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and I was sweating profusely. This man shifted me, holding me tighter. As we made our way through the hospital's doors, he placed me gently on a stretcher. But before I could turn to look at him one final time, the orderlies rushed me to the emergency room. Everything was a blur, and the next time I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. At first, when I woke up in the hospital, my head was throbbing. My body felt sore, and I was confused about how I ended up there. I remembered the man with the dog's head, but it all seemed so surreal, like a dream. I tried to remember the details, but it was all hazy, and I couldn't focus my thoughts. I wondered if I had hallucinated the entire episode. When I relayed my story of the dogman to one of the nurses, she looked at me with disbelief and concern. One of the doctors attending me was equally skeptical, dismissing my story as a symptom of my injury. They felt that the mild head injury I had received during the accident caused my imagination to run wild. They eyed me with apprehension, making me feel foolish for even telling them. I tried to reason with them that what I had seen was all real, but they were adamant that it was not. I couldn't escape the thought that the man with the dog's head was real, and that he had saved my life. Even though I was the only one who believed it, I knew it was the truth, I went home after a few days, but everything felt off somehow. It just didn't feel right. I couldn't shake that feeling of unease at home. Every time I glanced out the window, I had this nagging suspicion that I'd see the Dogman hovering around outside, peering in at me through the glass. His eyes, burning with an eerie yellow light, would lock with mine, sending shivers down my spine. But whenever I tried to point him out to my friends or my nurse, he seemed to vanish into thin air before they looked. It had been weeks since I returned from the hospital, yet I couldn't seem to shake off the trauma of that fateful night. I kept wondering if what happened to me was a hallucination caused by the shock, as the doctors thought, or if the creature truly existed, lurking in the dark corners around my house. That's what I thought. I tried to reason with myself. I tried to tell myself that the Dogman was a figment of my imagination. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting too. But the idea that he was outside just wouldn't go away. One morning I passed a window in my house, and I caught a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. I whirled around to face the source of the disturbance, and there it was, the Dogman, standing just outside my house, staring at me with unblinking, glowing eyes. I was paralyzed with terror, rooted to the spot, as that creature tilted its head to the side, sniffing the air. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but the vividness of its presence told me this was no illusion. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The Dogman took a step toward me and the house, and that's when I regained my senses. I bolted for my phone, dialing 911 and screaming for help. When the cops arrived, of course they found no trace of the Dogman, not even a paw print. They told me one more call like that, and I was going onto their crank list. But I know the Dogman was there. I had seen him. My life became increasingly isolated, as I had no friends left who didn't think I was out of my mind. I could see their pitying stares, and it made me feel sick. I wasn't mentally ill. I was just having some blood sugar issues that led to fainting spells. That's all the doctors ever told me. And that's the only problem I'm aware of having. Well, that and having no friends, of course. I stayed home all the time, occasionally noticing the Dogman outside, which oddly became more and more reassuring to me instead of scary. When I would see him, at least I knew I wasn't insane. And then came the night of the bad storm. I fell asleep early, as I find the sounds of storms shaking my house at night oddly comforting. But the sound of someone rapping on the door somewhat desperately woke me up. There was a strange man outside, but one that I felt I knew somehow. I opened the door a crack to ask him what was wrong, but he pushed in past me and bolted the door behind himself, telling me that there was a Dogman outside, one big enough to eat a grown man alive. He had seen it too. Whoever this strange and handsome man was, he could also see the Dogman out there. Finally, someone besides me was seeing the creature. I got the man some brandy and warmed him up by the fire. After a while, we fell into a conversation that was as comfortable as though we had known each other for many years. The man spoke of his life, and I sat in my armchair, mesmerized by the story he was telling me. He spoke in a low, gentle voice, and his eyes sparkled with a kind of intensity that left me feeling both uneasy and enchanted. I was bitten by a werewolf many years ago, he said, swirling his tea around in his cup. It unlocked something inside of me, something feral and wild. At first I was terrified, he said, but eventually I learned how to control it. I learned how to shift back and forth between my human form and my werewolf form at will. He took a sip of his tea and glanced up at me, his eyes softening. And then I met you. I saw you from a distance, and I knew I had to be with you. I couldn't resist the magnetic pull I felt toward you, but I knew that if I revealed my true nature, he'd be frightened. So I stayed hidden. So this man was claiming to be the werewolf. I didn't quite know how to respond. I mean, I had heard plenty of wild stories in my day, especially since moving out to the woods. But this man's story struck a chord within me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, or the way his voice seemed to wrap itself around me like a warm blanket. Whatever it was, I found myself believing him. Or at least, I found myself wanting to believe him. "Why are you telling me all this?" I finally asked him, setting my own tea aside. He looked at me, and I saw the raw emotion in his expression. "I want you to understand me," he said. "I want you to know that I'm not some mindless beast, that I'm capable of love and tenderness, just like any man. I want you to accept me for who I am." He began to change. He somehow grew. He somehow widened. His human skin turned to wolfen skin. His ears grew points and moved up on his flattening, elongating skull. He was becoming something not human, not canine, but some new third option. He was not a dogman. He was a werewolf. I took a deep breath and stood up from my chair, walking over to this immense, gentle beast. He looked down at me with hopeful eyes, and I reached up to take his hand. "I do accept you," I said softly. I accept all of you." For a moment, we just stood there, our hands intertwined, the fire crackling in the background. And it was in that moment that I realized I loved him too. And that he was not a monster. He was a werewolf, and he was my man.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Ready or not, here comes Volume 2 of our creepiest, scary campfire stories. Each of these curated or created by our 4 campfire experts, Alex, Bobby, Carrie, and Denny. Our rules are that you have to tell the story off the top of your head without using any reference materials. It's got to be either true or an original story. And it's got to be scary. These are transcripted versions of original campfire tales that I will be reading for you. You at home or wherever you are get to decide which of these stories is the scariest. Got it? Well, settle back and let's begin. Number 1. Michigan Dogman. In the Clearing. I can't prove to you that my story is true, but I can tell you that it scared me, and it still sends shivers down my spine to this day. This all happened in the summer of 1995, when I was camping with some friends in the wilds of northern Michigan. We were sitting around the campfire, telling ghost stories, and enjoying the peaceful serenity of the woods, when we heard the rustling of leaves nearby. We assumed it was just a raccoon or some other woodland creature, but the noise grew louder and closer. Suddenly a large, hairy creature appeared in the clearing, standing upright like a man, but with the features of a beast. Its eyes glowed amber red like coals, and its elongated, snarling canine jaws dripped with saliva. We were frozen in terror, unable to move or to speak. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl, a sound unlike anything I've ever heard since. It then started to approach us, slowly but surely. That's when we realized that we were face to face with the Michigan Dogman. We scrambled to our feet and tried to run, but it was no use. The creature was too fast, and it was gaining on us quickly. Despite our best efforts to outrun it, it managed to catch up, leap onto my friend's back, and I'm not sure what happened next. But all I know is he started screaming. We were all screaming by that point, and trying to fend off this monster. But it was too big, and it was too powerful for us to fight back. The Dogman dragged my friend off into the woods, and we were forced to stand there, doing nothing, for fear of our lives. The rest of us ran away, wondering what kind of being we had just come face to face with. We stumbled through the woods, our hearts pounding, and our minds replaying the terrifying encounter over and over again. The group of us were in legal red tape for years afterward, but we didn't kidnap our friend. We told him who the kidnapper was. The trouble was that the law doesn't believe in Dogman, so they kept trying to pin it on one or all of us, and they just couldn't make it stick. We survivors later became convinced that we had encountered the dreaded Michigan Dogman, a creature rumored to be half human and half wolf. It's been years since that night, and I still can't shake off the haunting memory of my friend's screams and the violent attack from that nightmarish creature. So if you ever find yourself camping in the wilds of northern Michigan, remember this story, and always keep an eye out for the Michigan Dogman, because if you see it, you may not live to tell the tale. Number 2. Jack and the Werewolf. So there was once this young guy named Jack who lived in a small village. He was known for being brave and adventurous, but sometimes his recklessness got the best of him. One fateful night, he crossed paths with a werewolf, which ended up costing him dearly. This werewolf was a notorious creature that terrorized the village every full moon. It was said that if the werewolf bit you, you would turn into one of them too. Now our young Jack didn't believe in the stories, and he thought it would be exciting to hunt down the werewolf and prove everyone wrong. So one full moon, young Jack went into the woods alone with his hunting gear. He roamed deep into the forest, hoping to find the elusive werewolf. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon the creature and prepared to attack. However, as he drew closer to the werewolf, it lunged at him, and without warning, bit him on the arm. Young Jack was shocked, but he still didn't believe in the werewolf stories, and he walked back home feeling proud of himself for getting so close to the creature on his first try. But as the days passed, Jack began to feel different. He couldn't eat, sleep, or focus on anything besides the pains in his own body. Soon the transformation started, and Jack turned into a werewolf himself. It was then that Jack realized he had made a grave mistake. He had been too reckless and had ignored the warnings of his fellow villagers. Now every full moon, Jack turns into a werewolf. He roams the woods, terrorizing the same village he once called home. He is a constant reminder that sometimes it's best to listen to the cautions of those who have come before us. Story number 3. Introducing the woodsman. The campers huddled around the crackling campfire, telling scary stories to each other as shadows danced around them. One of the storytellers, an experienced hiker, spoke up and asked, "Have you heard of the local monster here? It's called the woodsman, and it's been rumored to roam these woods for decades." The other campers listened with rapt attention as the hiker continued. Legend has it that the woodsman is a giant, Bigfoot-like creature with razor-sharp claws, an elongated canine snout, and an insatiable appetite for human flesh. Some say the woodsman is the reason why hikers and campers have gone missing in these woods for years. The campers shuddered with fear as they imagined the monstrous creature lurking in the shadows of the trees. They were interrupted by a rustling sound coming from the woods, which grew louder and more frequent. Suddenly the woodsman appeared from the trees. That had to be what it was, because it was man-shaped, but so much larger, covered in fur, with a head shaped something like a bear's head, but with a longer snout and more pointed ears. The claws on this thing were like those on a badger or wolverine, but sized up. It was bigger and more terrifying than any of them could have ever imagined when they heard the original tales told, with its eyes glowing bright red in the darkness, like little streetlights. The campers screamed and ran for their lives, hoping to escape the creature's wrath. But something strange happened as they ran. The further they got from the campfire, the less terrified they felt. In fact, they began to feel happy. Everything seemed suddenly so clear and peaceful. They realized they had been struggling and carrying a lot of unnecessary weight until that moment. Confused and disoriented, the campers wandered aimlessly through the woods until they found their way back to the campsite. As they gathered their things in stunned silence, one of them noticed a strange symbol etched into a nearby tree. It was a symbol for a very special type of mushroom that grows in those woods. One of them asked the others what that symbol could mean, but the group generally conceded that none of them was qualified to put into words what the true meaning was of anything that had just happened to them. It was undeniable that a lesson had been taught. Whether any of them had learned a thing was still open to question, though. Sometimes when a lesson flies over your head, it can seem like nothing but gibberish. Perhaps later in their lives, these campers will begin to fully grasp the meaning of their encounter with the local monster known as the woodsman. Number 4. The Thing That Climbed Through the Window. Once in a small isolated village on the edge of the forest, there was a young woman named Marina. Now Marina was known in that village for her kind heart and her love of adventure, often wandering into the woods to explore its secrets and its mysteries. One full moon night, as Marina lay in bed, she heard a faint whispering coming from outside. She tried to ignore it and sleep, but the whispering grew louder and more insistent. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore, and she began to investigate. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and made her way over to the window. There, in the moonlit darkness, she saw a figure standing in the middle of the village square. It was a tall, shadowy figure with piercing eyes that glinted in the moonlight. Marina watched in terror as the figure began to move, its limbs jerking and twisting in unnatural ways. It slowly made its way toward her house, its mouth opening and closing in a silent scream. Marina ran to her bed, pulling the covers up over her head, and tried to shut out the terrifying sight. But that thing was relentless, climbing in through the window. No matter which direction, it needed to bend its body parts to do so. Suddenly, Marina felt a cold hand close tightly around her ankle, pulling her toward the floor. She struggled, and she screamed, but the figure was too strong, dragging her toward the window and the darkness outside. But as Marina was about to be dragged out that window, the clouds parted, revealing the rising sun, and the figure disappeared into the shadows. Marina collapsed onto the floor, breathless and shaken, unsure of exactly what had just happened. From that day on, Marina double-locked all her windows before going to bed at night. She soon noticed that the villagers grew quiet whenever she told her story, and she wondered if they too had seen the shadowy figure that had haunted her nights. Maybe they were just afraid that if they talked about it too, that it might come for them next. Years later, as an elderly woman, Marina would still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and convinced that the figure was still out there, waiting and watching. Number 5. The Lizard Man Speaks. I never believed in monsters until I met one face to face. I was walking home from work late at night when I heard a strange rustling sound coming from behind me. I turned around, and there it was, a creature I couldn't even begin to describe. It was at least 10 feet tall, with scaly skin and razor-sharp claws. I froze, paralyzed with fear, as that monster approached me. Its eyes were glowing bright red, and its breath smelled like rotten meat. I knew I had to get away, but my legs wouldn't move. The monster reached out, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst. But then something strange happened. The monster didn't touch me. Instead, it spoke. English. "Please don't be afraid," it said in a deep rumbling voice. "I won't hurt you. I'm just lost and looking for a way home." I was dumbfounded. This monster could talk? I cautiously opened my eyes and looked up at the towering creature. It seemed genuine, like it was really lost and just needed help. I hesitated for a moment, but something in me couldn't leave this lost, frightened monster all alone. I knew what it was like to feel lost and desperate, so I offered to guide it back. The monster thanked me, and we set off down the dark street together. As we walked, it told me about its world and its people, and how it had accidentally gotten stranded in our world. I listened, fascinated, as I led it toward a nearby park. But when we arrived at the park, something even stranger happened. The monster changed form. Now it looked like a beautiful human woman who was looking at me with a grateful smile. "Thank you for helping me," she said. I was stunned. All this time, the monster had been a woman from a different world, putting on a scary appearance for purposes of defense, and I had almost let my fear get in the way of helping her. I walked home that night feeling grateful and feeling a newfound respect for the unknown. Number 6. The strange UFO in the woods. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip with my best friend Ben. We were both excited to escape the city and spend a peaceful night or two under the stars. But what we saw that night was anything but peaceful. As we were sitting around our campfire, we noticed a strange light in the sky. At first we thought it was just a shooting star, or maybe even a plane. But the light kept getting brighter and closer until we realized it was hovering just above the treetops. We were both frozen in fear, not sure of what to do next. The light then began to pulsate, and we could hear a low hum coming from it. Finally, the light vanished, and the hum slowly faded away. Ben and I were both in shock. We knew that we had just witnessed something extraordinary, something out of this world. But as we tried to make sense of what we had seen, Ben suddenly turned to me, his eyes glowing, an eerie shade of purple. "Jake, I have something to tell you," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own. I backed away from him, unsure of who or what I was now facing. "You see," Ben continued, "I'm not actually from this planet. I'm an alien sent here to observe you humans." I was gobsmacked. It was everything I had ever fantasized about, everything I'd ever seen in science fiction movies, yet never believed was true. "What are you telling me, Ben?" I stammered, trying to make sense of the situation. Ben observed me panicking, and then, as if nothing had ever happened, his eyes returned to their normal shade of blue, and he smiled at me. "Nothing's happening, Jake. You just saw a UFO, that's all. Don't you remember?" I was left confused, wondering if what I had seen was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth was stranger than anything I could have ever thought of. My friend Ben is something else. And now, I'm not so sure our simple camping trip was very simple after all. Story number 7. Alligator men in the sewer. I used to live on the streets of New York. I was poor, homeless, and had nothing to my name except for the clothes on my back. Life was hard, but I learned how to adapt. I became an expert at navigating the city's underground, using the sewer tunnels as my shelter. But one night something really weird happened. I was walking through the tunnels, trying to find a warm and dry spot to sleep, when I heard an odd noise. It sounded like something was slithering through the water, but the sound was too loud to be a rat or a snake. As I followed the noise, I saw something that I will never forget. It was an alligator. But it was an alligator that stood upright, like a human. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and I must have been hallucinating. But as I watched it move, I realized it was real. The alligator was walking on its hind legs, with its front legs held in front of it, almost like it was trying to mimic human movement. It was a bizarre sight, and it sent shivers down my spine. I know what I saw, but when I try to tell others, they don't believe me. They say I'm crazy, especially back then. They said I was a homeless man trying to make up stories for attention. But I wasn't lying. I saw something that night that was really out of the ordinary. Something that shouldn't have been there, walking upright, in the sewers of New York City. After that day, I don't dare venture into the tunnels anymore. Who knows what other surprises might be lurking down there, and I don't want to risk it, for my own safety. But I know what I saw back then, and I'll never forget it. Number 8. The Strange Mansion. At the edge of the small town of Millville, there was an old abandoned mansion that had been hidden in the dense overgrown forest for decades. The townsfolk had heard terrifying rumors about the mansion, but nobody dared approach it, until the day in the early 70s when a group of teenagers decided to explore the dilapidated old place. They made their way through the dense underbrush, pushing back the branches and leaves to reveal the moss-covered entrance to the mansion. As they stepped inside, the air was heavy and thick, filled with dust and decay. The creaking of old wooden floors echoed through the empty rooms as they made their way up to the top floor. In the uppermost room, the group found a strange, ancient amulet sitting on a pedestal. One of them picked it up, admiring its intricate design and strange unknown symbols. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and the amulet started glowing with an ominous red light. They all tried to run, but the door had locked itself behind them, trapping them inside. The air grew dark and heavy, filled with an ominous presence that filled them with a sense of dread. Suddenly, apparitions appeared, terrifying creatures of untold horror and despair. They clawed at the teens, occasionally leaving scratches that looked like those coming from a cat or a rat. The apparitions spoke, but in unfamiliar languages, their voices drowning out the screams of the now terrified teenagers. As the apparitions drew closer, the teens tried to fight them off, but their attempts were futile. One by one they fell to the ground, their lifeless bodies consumed by the horrific creatures. As the last of the teens drew their final breath, they heard the sound of laughter, a cackling and soulless laugh that chilled them to the bone. Years later, on the outskirts of town, kids still whisper about the cursed mansion and those teenagers who had vanished inside its cursed walls. The townsfolk, needless to say, avoid the area completely and moved on with their lives, never daring go near the old mansion again. But you know, they say that in the dark of night, when the wind howls and the leaves rustle in the trees, you can still hear the echoes of the teens' screams and the wicked laughter that filled them with terror. So, what do you think? Which was the scariest? Let us know in the comments section. In the meantime, I'd like to thank tonight's executive producer, Megara, who made this show possible. She's one of those people that I don't think we could do the show without, as she donates to us in so many ways. So thank you, Megara, and all the names you go under. And if you'd like to hear more about these multiple ways to donate to the channel and the various perks you can get in return, then just listen to our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thank you. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.